Once a year, researchers ask about 1,000 people in over 140 countries the same question, and the question is stranger than it sounds. Imagine a ladder. The top rung is the best possible life for you. The bottom rung is the worst. Where are you standing right now? People answer with a number. The numbers become an average. The averages become the headline you see every March about the happiest countries on Earth. And most of the time, the results behave exactly as you'd expect. Safe, wealthy nations near the top, war and poverty at the bottom. Except one country keeps refusing to fit. It has among the longest healthy lifespans in human history. Children ride its subways alone. Its trains apologize for arriving 20 seconds early. It is one of the wealthiest societies that has ever existed, and it has exported more ideas about living well than almost anywhere on the planet. On that ladder, it ranks 61st out of 147, below dozens of countries where the average person dies years sooner. So either everything we believe about this place is a fantasy, or the ladder is measuring the wrong thing. Picture a man in a kitchen he spent 9 years working toward. The counters are the ones he chose. The window frames a view he pays a great deal for. His phone says 400 people love him, and somewhere in the gap between one Sunday and the next Monday, a thought arrives that he will never say out loud, because saying it would sound ungrateful. Is this it? He isn't depressed. That's what makes it interesting. He did everything correctly. He climbed. And somewhere around the 14th rung, he discovered the design flaw in ladders. The view improves, but the climbing never stops, and the rung you're standing on always feels like the floor. Psychology has a name for the mechanism. In 1978, a small study compared people who had won large lottery prizes with people who had been paralyzed in accidents. The winners weren't living in permanent joy. They rated ordinary pleasures, a good meal, a conversation, as less enjoyable than a control group did. The study was tiny and has been argued over ever since, but the idea outlived the data. We adapt, at a speed that borders on cruelty. The dream becomes the baseline becomes the complaint. Which raises a possibility worth sitting with. What if our entire model of happiness rests on a metaphor that quietly guarantees dissatisfaction? If life is a ladder, then wherever you are standing is, by definition, not the top. The country is Japan, and you have to accept something immediately, or this whole story collapses into a postcard. Japan is not a paradise. It scores 6.13 on that ladder, while Finland takes first for the 9th year running. It rates poorly on the freedom to choose what you do with your life. It has a word karoshi that means death from overwork. So this is not a story about a happier country, which is exactly when it gets strange. In 2009, 2 cultural psychologists, Yukiko Uchida in Kyoto and Shinobu Kitayama in Michigan, ran an experiment so simple it's almost funny. They asked Americans and Japanese to describe happiness. 5 ways. Whatever came to mind. Nearly every American answer was positive achievement, confidence, feeling on top of things. Almost 97%, unambiguously good. The Japanese answers included something no Western researcher would have thought to predict. Alongside the good, a substantial share of Japanese respondents spontaneously described happiness as having a downside. That it creates distance from others, that it invites envy, that it doesn't last, and that knowing it doesn't last is part of what it is. Sit with that, because it reorganizes everything. For one culture, happiness is a possession you accumulate. For the other, it is a temporary balance between people, understood from the inside to be fragile. Now go back to the survey. Where are you standing on the best possible life? That question was built by a civilization that thinks happiness can be stacked. Ask it of someone raised to believe that claiming a high number is faintly indecent, and what exactly are you measuring? This doesn't mean Japan is secretly happy and the rankings are wrong. researchers genuinely disagree about how much of the gap is cultural reporting. It means something more unsettling. Two societies can use the same word and be pointing at different phenomena. Which is why, when scientists went hunting for the mechanics of a long, good life, they didn't go to the top of the ranking. They went to an island chain most Westerners can't find on a map. 2.5 hours southwest of Tokyo, the water turns a color you don't quite believe. This is Okinawa, closer to Taipei than to Tokyo, once an independent kingdom, and in the spring of 1945, the site of a battle so catastrophic that 1/4 of its civilians died. In 1975, a physician named Makoto Suzuki started doing something unglamorous there. He began counting old people, then visiting them, then following them, for decades. His study is still running, which makes it the longest continuous investigation of centenarians on Earth. What emerged wasn't people surviving into extreme age. It was people arriving there still gardening, still walking to market, still hosting. And when researchers asked the oldest islanders the simplest possible question, "Why do you get up in the morning?" a word kept coming back. Ikigai. From Iki, life, and Gai, worth, the thing that makes life worth the living of it. If you're picturing 4 overlapping circles right now, I have to tell you that diagram is not Japanese. A Spanish astrologer drew it in 2011 to illustrate purpose. In 2014, a British blogger watched a TED talk about Okinawan longevity, swapped the word in the center for Ikigai, and published it. He has since described what he did with disarming honesty. He changed one word on a diagram and released a meme into the world. It has been copied tens of millions of times and sold back to us as ancient wisdom, complete with a requirement the original never had, that somebody pay you for it. The real origin is harder and far better. In the 1950s, a psychiatrist named Mieko Kamiya went to work at a sanatorium for patients with Hansen's disease. Under Japanese policy, those patients weren't merely treated, they were removed. Segregated onto an island, often given new names so their families wouldn't be shamed by the connection. Whatever a person had been was confiscated at the gate. Kamiya sat with them for years and noticed something that made no sense on the surface. The patients whose bodies were most damaged were not always the ones who suffered most. Some of the deepest despair appeared in patients with milder symptoms. What broke people wasn't pain. It was the collapse of any sense that their existence still registered anywhere, that tomorrow differed from today because they were in it. Her 1966 book on Ikigai is still a standard reference for Japanese researchers and has never been fully translated into English. Then, in 1994, a research team in northern Japan mailed a health questionnaire to 43,391 adults. Buried between blood pressure and smoking was a single line asking whether they had Ikigai in their lives. Over 7 years, 3,048 of those people died. After adjusting for age, illness, exercise, education, the ones who had said yes had a meaningfully lower risk of dying. And the detail that convinces me is the one that doesn't flatter the story. The difference appeared in cardiovascular deaths and in external causes. It did not appear for cancer. Wishful thinking smears pleasantly across everything. This didn't. But this is an observational study, and observational studies can't tell you which way the arrow points. Maybe people who are already healthier and better supported simply find it easier to say yes. Feeling that your life is worth living may be partly a symptom of a good life, rather than its engine, and honest science has to leave that door open. Still, the pattern keeps reappearing. Over 6,000 American adults followed for 14 years. Those with a stronger sense of purpose lived longer, even after controlling for good moods and good relationships. Being cheerful wasn't doing the work, being directed was. And in Chicago, Researchers measured purpose in older adults, followed them to death, then examined their brains. Alzheimer's leaves physical evidence you can count. People with a stronger sense of purpose held onto their thinking better, while carrying a comparable burden of disease in their tissue. The damage was there. The decline was slower. The other Okinawan answer isn't a philosophy at all. It's a social structure called a Moai, originally small groups of neighbors who pooled money so any one of them could survive a bad harvest. They didn't stay financial. They became lifelong. Children were placed into a Moai and stayed in the same one for 80 years, which means a woman of 88 can drink tea with 5 people who knew her before she could read. Not friends she made. Friends she was given and could not drift away from. And here the science stops being contested. An analysis pooling 148 studies and over 300,000 people found that strong social relationships were associated with roughly a 50% greater likelihood of survival, comparable to quitting smoking. Loneliness is not a mood, it's a physiological state. Everything else Japan is famous for turns out to be smaller and stranger than advertised. Harahachi-bu stop eating, at 80% full, comes from a 1713 manual by a scholar who lived to 83 when the average was under 50. Your stomach needs 20 minutes to tell your brain the truth, so 80% is simply where you let it catch up. Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, sounds like a monastic rite and was invented in 1982 by a forestry official with 2 problems: unused national woodland and an exhausted workforce. Japan then studied it honestly, and the honest verdict is that a 2026 meta-analysis rated the certainty of the evidence as very low. Kaizen, the philosophy of relentless small improvement, was carried into Japan by American occupation trainers, whose 1951 instructional film was titled, in Japanese, Improvement in 4 Steps, a wartime manual America sold back to itself 35 years later as Eastern wisdom. And Wabi-sabi lives in the tea room of Sen no Rikyu, who built entrances so low that a samurai had to leave his sword outside and crawl in on his knees. The architecture was the argument. Underneath all of it sits the same structure, which modern psychology stumbled onto independently. Deci and Ryan proposed that humans need 3 things: autonomy, the sense that your actions are your own; competence, the sense you're effective at something; relatedness, the sense of being genuinely connected. Meet all 3 and motivation sustains itself. Starve one and it collapses, regardless of the rewards. Watch a 90-year-old woman in her garden at 7 in the morning. Nobody assigned her this. She's been doing it for 70 years. The vegetables go to people whose names she knows. She is standing in the exact center of all 3 needs, in the dirt, having never heard of any of this. And when she loses track of the hour, she's in the state Csikszentmihalyi called flow, which requires only a challenge slightly beyond your skill. You can find it while weeding. One more honest note, because it's the most sobering fact here. Okinawa is losing it. After the war came canned pork, white bread, and fast food density among the highest in Japan. By 2000, Okinawan men had fallen from first in the country to 26th out of 47 prefectures. Japanese public health calls it the 26 shock. Same islands, same genes, 1 generation. Whatever Okinawa knew was never mystical, which means it could be described, and it means it could be lost. So go back to the ladder. Every idea in this story, the reason to rise, the friends you were given at birth, the meal you stopped before the end of, the bowl of tea in a room you had to kneel to enter, none of them is on a ladder. You don't climb a garden, you don't achieve a friendship, you don't arrive at a cup of tea. The question we've been asking measures altitude. And almost everything that makes a life feel worth living has no altitude at all. It has frequency. It happens on a Tuesday, and then it happens again. Kamiya's patients had nothing on any ladder available to them. Some of them found it anyway, a garden, a page, another person, and said their lives were worth living, which is more than the man in the kitchen can say. He's still standing there, beautiful counters, asking the wrong question the way we were all trained to. Because it was never how high you've climbed. It was whether anything is waiting for you tomorrow that would notice if you didn't come.